Hello and come on in for yet another ship review. Before we get started, I ask that you give this video a like and subscribe if you enjoy watching Star Citizen content with a focus on quality. We don't pump videos out for views, instead we focus on delivering high quality videos full of information in an op-ed style format. This time, we're taking things inside the PTU to take a look at some of the upcoming changes to some of the older ships that aim to move them up to the modern standards of the Star Citizen player base. More specifically, we're getting down to brass tacks on the premier dropship from Anvil Aerospace, the Valkyrie. In the upcoming 4.1 patch release, is receiving a buff to pilot control DPS by way of slave turrets that were historically relegated to dedicated gunners. And now that we've had a chance to spend a little bit of time behind the sticks, the big question remains. Does the Anvil Valkyrie check enough boxes to be a consideration for your fleet, or should we continue to skip over it in favor of more modern, well-considered ship options? Welcome back to ForgeCore Gaming. I'm your host Phoenix, and this is the Valkyrie from Anvil Aerospace. The Valkyrie, in Norse mythology, is often depicted as a fierce, armored bringer of death, and protector of the fallen. Their primary roles were to oversee battles, choosing which warriors would die and which would survive. And for those who fell in battle, if deemed worthy, were guided by the Valkyries to Valhalla. Aptly named, the Valkyrie from Anvil Aerospace answers the call by charging into hostile war zones, providing precision fire from above as it ushers in or out a platoon of warfighters for rapid strategic infill or exfil, with the aim of turning the tide of war in their favor. But historically, the fact that many players consider the Valkyrie to be a single-purpose ship, coupled with the fact that strategic troop insertion isn't really needed in the game yet, plus the Valkyrie's heavy crew requirement, the popularity of the Anvil dropship never really caught hold. So when I read the patch notes of the upcoming buff to its pilot-controlled firepower and consequential reduction in required crew, I knew I just had to take a look, if anything, for the sake of being thorough. Now, I've always kinda had my eye on the Anvil dropship. From its sleek yet robust exterior design language that provides an aggressive and imposing aesthetic, to its wide cargo bay that facilitates carrying rover-sized vehicles, I always saw a ton of potential in it as a platform. But it was just shy of being a candidate for frequent use, because it required crew members to be viable in a combat scenario. Until now. You see, with the addition of the two size 4 weapons being under pilot control, a solo player will soon command a respectable sustained DPS of up to 2,852 when those 4 guns are fully powered and all others are switched to ballistics or removed entirely. Just a note here, this DPS value is with 2 size 4 attritions and 2 size 3 ardor repeaters. Now of course, in a more reasonable loadout or with a different power distribution, a player could expect a sustained DPS value somewhere in the low to mid 2000s. But even that is a notable increase over the approximate 1100 DPS they had before. Now keep in mind, the Valkyrie isn't perfect. There are still a few other problems with the ship, most notably its durability, but we're going to talk about that later. First, we're going to do a quick rewind and go through some of the other features that I'm putting on the good list, and then we'll follow it up with talking about the bad. For starters, let's discuss cargo and storage. As I mentioned earlier, the Valkyrie has a fairly large cargo bay, big enough to fit a rover-sized vehicle, which means for the low price of 124,740 AUEC, you can gain rudimentary medbay capabilities by way of the Ursa Medevac, which fits nicely in the Valkyrie cargo bay with up to 6 SCU of cargo grid space remaining, which means you can engage in activities with the potential for bodily harm, heal up and keep going, and you can carry at least a little bit of cargo. You can carry much more if you don't mind that cargo being off-grid. And just a side note, if you choose to opt out of bringing a vehicle along with you, thereby losing the medical capabilities, the Valk's cargo grid is being bolstered from a mere 30 SCU of snappable cargo space up to 90 SCU when 4.1 is released, which is very respectable for a ship this size. Just for reference, that's 18 SCU higher than the Corsair and just 6 SCU less than the Constellation Andromeda, and the Valkyrie is 5 meters shorter than the Corsair and 15 meters shorter than the Andromeda, while being a considerable amount more maneuverable when it comes to pitch, yaw, and roll. In addition to that cargo grid storage capacity, the Valkyrie has 4.5 SCU of internal storage, courtesy of dedicated storage lockers on the bottom floor, plus 20 gun racks in the personnel transport areas of the ship, which is honestly a very good amount of storage space for a ship this size. Furthermore, the Valk has numerous exits to facilitate troops or cargo moving off the ship in a much more expedient manner, and 2 of those exits are covered by guns befitting its intended use. Now I know I'll get at least one person in the comments stating that those side door guns are effectively useless, and okay, yes, they bring fairly negligible damage against ships, but I've seen ground troops blow up an Ursa on more than one occasion, and any size ship gun one-shots a person on foot. So these guns would definitely help suppress movement from ground forces, which is what they're designed for. Moving on to bridge and habitation, another point for the good list is that the Valkyrie comes with full amenities. Those being bedlog capabilities, bathroom facilities, as well as food preparation areas, which, I know, these don't matter just yet, but they will. At least if you believe the roadmap the CIG has put out stating that they will. Overall, the HAB is a fairly decent layout, with facilities for 5 crew members. But if I'm being honest, they really should sort this out to be for 3 crew members, each with a small private room, as the remote wing gunners are no longer necessary. I know from a utility or practical standpoint that makes absolutely no difference, but it would likely appeal to more players if they redesign the upper level, particularly since I always hear a very specific critique from other players. The fact that the crew area is exposed to the cargo area without any form of barrier in between. Now at first, I thought that was sort of splitting hairs, but with the engineering gameplay on the way, the current format could be problematic for life support systems given that 75% of the ship shares one giant open space, meaning venting artificial atmosphere would be an issue in the event that life support systems begin to fail. Plus, cordoning off fires would be nearly impossible. Moving on to the cockpit, we find that it is sectioned off, which is nice, and the door to the pilot is supposed to lock, but that's a function that doesn't appear to be in the game as of right now. Once we get in the pilot seat, we're greeted with a very well laid out MFD array, with all 4 of your MFDs being in a single eye line and exactly 0 of them occupying any of the real estate of the cockpit window, leaving the pilot's view unhindered. On top of that, the pilot has 180 degrees of view on the horizontal plane and 90 degrees of view on the vertical, which, for a ship as robust looking as the Valkyrie, is definitely a huge win. I've kind of hinted at this in some previous points, but the Valkyrie packs a lot into a relatively small form. At just 48 meters long and 37 meters wide, this puts it in the size territory of the Zeus, which is on the smaller end of what I consider medium-sized ships. And this matters because of a few factors. Ships with physical cross-sections are harder to hit, and smaller ships can fit in more places. Though fitting in more places may sound kinda dumb, and you're definitely not parking this in a Polaris by the way, consider the idea that you have to park your ship whenever you go planetside. And being in a smaller, more compact ship means you can squeeze into places like this, meaning you have quicker access to POIs during infill, plus you have quicker exfil when leaving. For a quick size comparison, here's a side-by-side with the Starlancer Max, which is a very capable ship, mind you, but also a very large, heavy, and slow one. Which brings me to my next point, the speed. Now I don't want anyone to be confused here, the Valkyrie is not a nimble ship. It goes decently fast though, capping out at 207 meters per second in SCM mode, unboosted, but it does take a bit of time to get there. It, in a lot of ways, reminds me of the Redeemer in its flight characteristics, but the Redeemer has a little bit of an edge, as the Valk does feel very heavy when it comes to turning, which makes sense as it's about 170,000 kilograms heavier than the Redeemer. Even still, high-ish top speeds are a benefit in very obvious ways. You take less time to get places and can evade or pursue enemies more effectively. Keep in mind, you're not setting any speed records here, but for a ship capable of carrying 20 plus personnel and vehicles and cargo, the Valk can certainly move. But now that we've gone through some of the positives of the Valkyrie, it's time to talk about the bad. And we're going to start this conversation off with one glaring issue that the Valkyrie has, its durability. When reviewing the ship, I was actually caught off guard by how thin its skin is. You would be forgiven if you assumed that an armored dropship would be able to take a beating, especially when its primary function is to get behind enemy lines and insert ground troops and vehicle assets. In the future, when armor is actually factored into the game, that may in fact be the case, but for the time being, We are still using hull HP, which is a number that represents the total hit points each section of the ship has combined, meaning each wing has X HP, the cargo area has Y HP, the cockpit has Z HP, and so on. And all total out to be the total hull HP. Now that's an oversimplification of it, but an easy way to look at this is the more hull HP a ship has, the more HP each section has. But the Valkyrie only has 44,053 hull HP, which may sound like a decent amount on paper, but that's roughly 24,000 less than the Guardian, which shouldn't be taking nearly as much incoming fire as a purpose-built dropship. And the Guardian is much smaller. If we compare it to other ships closer to its size, for example, the Redeemer, it also comes up shy by roughly 22,000 hull HP. Just an illustration of how not good this is, I collided with a soft-killed Mustang during a bounty, which is literally about 5% of the mass of the Valkyrie, and it turned my otherwise untouched hull red. To make matters worse, the Valkyrie only has 4 size 2 shield generators protecting that delicate skin, meaning enemies don't have to do much work before their firepower is peppering your hull without any buffer in between. What bothers me about this is the fact that the Anvil Paladin, which sold as a concept during IAE 2024, is based on the same exact platform as the Valkyrie, and it has size 3 shields. So there's obviously room for a size 3 shield on the Valkyrie. If it's a power issue, then add another power bank. I'm certain there's room for that as well. Which brings me to my next point. Wasted space. Now this one may or may not be a point of contention amongst players, but I'm of the convention that having enough drop seats for 20 troops is very excessive and wasteful. Those drop seats take up 2 entire wide corridors, either one of which could be eliminated, and I believe there would still be too many drop seats. As it stands, 23 to 25 people are needed to fill the Valkyrie, and that's before engineering comes into play. They could have installed more shield generators, or power banks, or both, or a medical bed. Any of those would have made the Valkyrie much more viable than it currently is, and they all would have been thematically appropriate. Imagine what the Valk would have been if it had size 3 shields, or a medical bed that enabled you to heal up the wounded warriors you were pulling out of a hazardous area of operation. The precedent for it has certainly been established already. The Paladin will have a size 3 shield. The Cutlass Red has medical beds, so does the Pisces Medical, and the Terrapin Medic, and the Starlancer TAC, another dropship. In my opinion, this is one of the major glaring issues of the Valk at this point in time. Which brings me to my final point on the bad list, the price. Whether you're pledging the Valkyrie in the cash shop or purchasing it in-game with AUBC, the Valk is expensive. Coming in at just under 20 million credits in-game or $375 online, it is a notable purchase for most people. Now I get it, there is an anvil tax and a dropship tax, which just bewilders me to no end. But there is so much room for improvement at that price point. There's a lot of opportunity for CIG to make this ship worth that $375. And right now, they're just not really doing that. On one hand, I want to recommend the Valkyrie. I really do. It's a great looking ship, and technically you can engage in several gameplay loops with it. It can be a small cargo hauler, or you can use it in mid-tier bounties as a solo pilot. It's amenity complete and has features like giant VTOL thrusters that will serve a purpose in the near future when they more seriously differentiate atmospheric flight. It can carry vehicles for mining or medical, or just getting around. It has ample external storage and a great cockpit setup. But on the other, I find it difficult to do so because people come to review videos typically to justify the cost or price of something, hopefully before they buy it. I will give it this. The recent buff to pilot control DPS and cargo grid is a step in the right direction. It is 100% more viable for regular use, even as a solo pilot. But this is not, by any means, a must-buy. This is one of those ships that if you feel drawn to it, for whatever reason, then yes, you will probably get decent use out of it. As a daily driver, I give it a solid B+ on a scale of F tier to S tier. You can use it in most gameplay loops, but it isn't particularly good at anything, and it isn't particularly well suited for the dropship gameplay, the basis of its design. As a speculative purchase, I give it an A- because it has room to grow with what I consider obvious low-hanging fruits. Namely, cut the jump seats in half. Use the added space for something more useful. Increase shields and durability, and you have yourself a much more valuable ship. The speculation comes into play because we don't know if CIG will ever get around to something like this, and to my knowledge, they haven't even mentioned anything about it. But there's time, and the game is always evolving. And if they do ever make some of these improvements, the price will almost certainly go up. So it's a somewhat decent investment if you believe that CIG will make some improvements. That's it, that's all I got. And now that you have my thoughts on the soon-to-be improved Anvil Valkyrie, drop a comment and let me know yours. I would love to hear from you. Also, if you've made it this far in the video, I'd love it if you joined us on our journey throughout the Star Citizen universe by hitting that subscribe button. Furthermore, I left my Discord link in the description of the video. Feel free to join us if you're looking for someone to play with. We have our big multi-crew nights on Fridays, so make sure to let us know if you're interested in joining. All we ask is that you be amicable to the community we've built so far. As always, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the verse.